Hey kids, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving. One of my favorite holidays, to be sure. Like getting together with friends and family. Love food, I love cooking, and Thanksgiving's one of those holidays where you get to do all those things. So let's talk a little bit about it. Um, I think that my favorite part is the cooking while conversing with people. I like that idea. Give me all the pies. Um, Turkey, fine, whatever. But give me some ham. Big ham fan, big pie fan. All right, so where do we begin here? And it begins with this concept called Puritanism. And the Puritans, these are in England. This is post Protestant Reformation, post 1534, because 1534 is when King Henry VIII says, okay, if you're not going to let me annul my marriage so that I can have a male heir, then I am starting my own church called the Anglican Church. And they felt that the Church of England wasn't strict enough. In fact, the term Puritan is, as we'll see in a minute, not even something that they call themselves. This comes later from us. Felt that women were treated too equally in Anglicanism. They also didn't like a lot of the elements of Catholicism were still there in the early English church. We refer to them as historians of things of popery, things that are within the Catholic Church that still exist. And a lot of them are ceremonial in nature, a lot of the kind of pomp and circumstance surrounding church services. And this group of people said, no, that's not what it's about. We want to get back to the roots of Christianity. Let's get back to interpreting the Bible solely as the authority. So these ceremonial things, these things that are created by man, get rid of them. And there's this sense that the devil was present in everyday life. And so if the devil is there, then we need to be on the lookout for him. We need to be on the lookout for people he has possessed. And so, as we'll see, where these people settle, this is kind of a piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding the Salem witch trials. This belief that the devil is always there, the devil is convincing people, and so you have to be wary and you have to try and catch people. Puritanism is a term that we call a pejorative. It's initially constructed as an insult. It's something that is meant to be insulting to these people, but the name eventually sticks, and so historically that's what we refer to them as. Now, they leave England because, again, the Anglican Church isn't strict enough for them, and they go to the Netherlands so that they can perform their religious ceremonies, so that they can practice their religion the way that they see fit. The problem is they look at the Dutch, and this is the golden age of the Netherlands, golden age of the Dutch. They are one of the richest groups of people in Europe. Right now, they're kind of sort of still a part of the Spanish part of the Holy Roman Empire, but they are very city-like. They're very cosmopolitan. And the Puritans would look at that and say, oh, no, we don't want that. No. Yeah, we can practice our religion freely, but these people aren't really our cup of tea. H.L. Mencken, the famous comedian, he would go on to define Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. And that kind of gets at the root of Puritanism. It's not about being happy. It's not about finding happiness either. It's about you adhering to the construct of the Bible. So where do we get pilgrims from? Okay, so pilgrim generally means someone on a religious journey. Pilgrims were Puritans who wanted to break away. We've already covered that. They receive a royal charter to go to Virginia and Northern Virginia and establish a colony. Where are they going to go? Let's take a look at this map over here. You'll see this is Virginia. So when we laugh and we're like, ha ha ha, they were aiming for Virginia and they never made it there. Ah ha ha. Sort of. It's not really the whole truth. And this is why kind of historical context matters. If we understand the Virginia charter over here, we understand that they're actually shooting for the very northernmost point here, right around the Hudson River, which at this point had been explored, and that's where they were shooting for. Do they end up a little bit further north? Yeah, they do, but it's not the kind of hilarity that some people like to point at and be like, oh, what a joke. Most of the people who are making this trip are families, not contractors. They're not looking necessarily to make a buck. They're looking to start a life, and that influences the types of people who are there. They wanted permanence. Many of these were children that they're bringing in. As I mentioned, they aim for the mouth of the Hudson River. They were blown a little bit off course. They end up in the north there in Massachusetts. So where do they end up? Right here is Cape Cod. If anyone's ever been there, end up kind of in Provincetown, and then eventually they're kind of moored off there for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, I think 2 months, and they eventually make their way to Plymouth. Plymouth to Plymouth. So they leave Plymouth. That's why they named the town Plymouth. Didn't really care that they were blown off course. They're like, hey, okay, this is where we're going to start our life. Sort of religious persecution-ish. I mean, it's not like they weren't allowed to do what they were doing in the Netherlands. It's just they were like, oh, no, the Dutch, they're spending money and they're wearing fashion and they are talking together, how dare them, and enjoying themselves, God forbid, literally. And so they say, no, we don't want that. So yeah, it's kind of religious persecution, but that tends to get blown out of proportion when we talk about the myths of the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving. Who else is on the Mayflower? This is a replica Mayflower. You can see the actual Mayflower is short and fat. It's not a huge ship, but it's short and fat. Frequent travelers, there are people who traveled all over. Interestingly enough, there's one gentleman who was shooting for Jamestown in the early days of Jamestown. That ship was blown off course and shipwrecked on the island of Bermuda, this kind of paradise island. And that gentleman would make his way back. He would, some of the other people would tell their stories about being there, and that, we believe, served as the catalyst for William Shakespeare's The Tempest, one of his great plays, which is just kind of fun, a storm that blows a different ship. But anyway, that gentleman, Stephen something or other, he'll make his way on this trip, but he's the only one who'd been to the New World before. There are travelers, only about 50% of them were Puritans. The rest are some other groups of people kind of looking to make a life over there. And so they end up here on Plymouth Rock, right? This beautiful, idyllic piece of real estate, except not so much. If you've ever been there, it's, I don't know. I know that it's this piece of Americana, but it's kind of underwhelming. This is the actual rock that you're seeing there. They built a kind of gazebo around it. People used to come and like chip off pieces of it and keep them as souvenirs. For a long time, it was realized that somebody was using a giant hunk of it in the town of Plymouth as their doorstep. So like people would walk up it to get into their house. Eventually, it's moved to this kind of place where it is now. And it's on the cart and it's moved and it breaks in half. You can see kind of the crack there that's been resealed. And we're not even sure if it's actual first landing spot. It's the grandson of one of the members of the Mayflower who said, hey, my grandfather, he's dying. So this grandson is dying. He's like 85 years old. And he asks the town elders, can you take me to the spot where we first set foot on Plymouth Rock? And this is the first recording that anybody has of this place that has occupied the American consciousness for so long. It's the first time that there's actually anything written down about this. This dude saying, hey, take me to that spot. So he's like half carried down to this point, and he kind of looks around and he's like, there, that's the rock that my grandfather told me was the one. And everyone's like, oh, this is such a big deal. There's no way to know if this is truthful or not, if the grandfather had lied to the grandson, if the grandson even knew what he was talking about. My dude's 80 years old and is dying. So it's interesting that there's this concept of Plymouth Rock. And okay, I guess it's symbolic of landing there, but European explorers had already been to this region. They'd been there before. So I don't know. It's just intriguing to me why it occupies such a part of the consciousness. Let's talk food. Turkey, right? Maybe, but probably not. What foods did they have? Okay, venison for sure. And in fact, some of the Wampanoags who make their way there, hearing the sound of gunfire that they took to mean war, but is actually probably just setting off the celebration, brought 5 deer with them. We have recording that. Duck, most likely, or other small fowl. Geese, maybe. Seafood for sure. Definitely mussels, possibly oysters, maybe even lobster. And for a long time, lobster was considered like a nuisance. And in fact, many prisoners in the Massachusetts and Rhode Island prison systems were fed lobsters in like the 1800s, and now we think of it as this delicacy. Beans for sure, veggies for sure, berries, mixed berries. But how about the biggest one? How about corn? Well, yeah, maybe, probably corn mash, not actually corn on the cob. So, sorry, Thanksgiving turkey. And they dress like this, right? Buckles on their shoes and black and white and these very formal attire. Yeah, but only for religious ceremonies. And to be sure, this was not a religious ceremony. This was a harvest celebration. So really, they probably dressed like this. I mean, not like this, but earth tones, okay? Reds and blues and browns and things like that. So sorry to the buckle hat people out there making those in first grade and feeling real good. So it's the first and only one because it's not like this thing happened over and over again. Why did the Wampanoag help? Basically, the Wampanoag had suffered a debilitating disease. They'd lost like 50% of their population. So they wanted help against one of the other native tribes in the area, and they were hoping that this group of people would do that. Squanto, or Tisquantum, is probably the proper name. Squanto is the anglicized name. Yeah, real dude, really did probably help out at least a little bit. He'd been to England before. Eventually, he was recaptured by the British and brought back to England, and by the time he made his way back, he was on his deathbed. Thanksgiving. If it were a religious ceremony, there would not be the pomp and circumstance and fun and revelry that we associate with Thanksgiving. It would have been a solemn affair. It would have been religious in nature, and as we learned about the Puritans, very, very solemn. Oh yeah, and then 1637 happened, where basically the entire tribe of Wampanoag were murdered by the settlers who continued to live in that area. So there's that too. Oh yeah, and they robbed the graves. Remember I told you 50% of the Wampanoag had died previously due to disease. When the English arrived, they began robbing the graves in order to find the supplies that they needed. So no big deal. If it's a harvest festival, is it really happening in November? It's probably happening in October when Canada celebrates Thanksgiving. So shout out to you, Canada. You got something right. How does it become a national holiday? 1819, New York City proclaims it as a day of Thanksgiving in November. Then in 1863, as a way to try and reunite the country, Abraham Lincoln declares a national day of Thanksgiving, being the last Thursday in November. Now in 1941, that changes. We're in the midst of the Great Depression. We're just about to jump into World War II. And in order to spur businesses on to get the holiday season started a little early, it is now no longer the last Thursday. It is now the fourth Thursday in November. Thanksgiving is celebrated instead. So shout out to capitalism, Black Friday. That's where that comes from in order to recoup the losses from the Great Depression. So shout out to you again, Canada. Probably more right than anything else. So some Thanksgiving myths and things of that nature. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed yourself.